City and State TV. I'm Morgan Pehme here with my friend and colleague Gerson Borrero at City and State SOMOS 14 Hub. We are joined now by Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer. Borough President, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Morgan.
So our objective in this extensive coverage of SOMOS was to try to provoke and bring about a conference that would be really substantive, that wouldn't just be a junket, but that there would be takeaways that would influence the dialogue. Have you seen substance here so far?
Well, I chose to go to the economic development workshops. And so I just came from one talking about MBE, WBE, and I thought it was good in the sense that Assembly member to be Blake from the Bronx was the moderator, and he's going to be a star. I saw him last year at the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus dinner when he spoke, and I said, "Who's that?" So he won just recently. He asked provoking questions. They were not sleepy, easy softballs. And of course, you had the state there. You had some diversity officers, MTA, and so on. And you could see that he's going to be pushing. So, and they answered sometimes, honestly about what it is. MBE is not such an easy accomplishment. He asked a great question. Okay, so 30% is supposed to be the goal, and the penalties are? And there was no answer. Right. So I thought that was interesting. And then this morning I went to one on capital and lack thereof, how you get it if you're a small business. Of course, I asked a question, and Assembly Member Linares backed me up, like, capital's great, except if the rent goes up 500%. What are you supposed to do? So I thought the economic development workshops were good.
But you know also that, and you've been in this game of politics and what happens, and this is a person who hasn't even taken office and has all this enthusiasm. The reality is that once you get into that, what seems to be obstructionist government, with the best intentioned people, once they sworn in, he's in the assembly, he has to deal with leadership matters, committees, and who's ever gonna do what. So is he going to have his bubble burst once he gets up to Albany? And you know the process.
I know the process.
What advice do you offer him?
We've discussed it. I advise, he's got some colleagues there. He's got Assembly Member Brian Kavanaugh, who's incredibly smart and whose bubble has not been burst. He's passing legislation, and they're sort of biding their time, I think, until they can make their own move. I believe that if you've got the hard work and a good mind, and when you ask good questions, you get legislation passed, and people start to take you seriously. Yes, I know about leadership issues. I was in the city council. I support a guy named de Blasio, remember, over Quinn. So I'm familiar with what it's like to be in those challenging situations.
Since you bring up supporting someone who actually won, okay?
Well, yeah, but I supported de Blasio when he was
speaker.
Right. He did not win.
Right, but I'm saying you sort of picked the winner from day one. Did you see the potential in de Blasio then, and what do you see now? You didn't see it, so why did you support him?
I did support him. Yes, I saw. We were friends from the Dinkins administration. And I like that he tries to do the organizing along with the substance, which is also what I do. So, yes, he didn't win, but in the end it did pay off because now he's mayor, as we know. Yeah.
And has that helped you, the fact that you're supporting him and you know the real deal with de Blasio? Or is it right now at this point, how do you see his mayoralty?
Well, I have to tell you, every time he sees me, he calls me conscience.
Okay.
I'm his conscience, which I like. I think that's a good role. So I tell him when he's right and when he's wrong. I think he's a list guy. I can see it. Whenever he calls me, I say, what number is that item on your list? Because he makes a list. Pre-K, affordable housing, and so on. And if you're not on the list, you might not get, the same support. So at least he sticks with something that he says he's going to do.
Are you keeping him awake?
I definitely text him pretty constantly. This is a good idea. This is a terrible idea, Gale.
And people in my political club, and full disclosure, it was a Democratic political club, they used to call me the conscience of the club too, but that always felt like some backhanded compliment. It was always like I was a pain in the ass.
I have the same way. When I'm in a meeting, if there goes Brewer, my conscience, I feel the same way.
and Borough President, I've seen you at so many different fora over the years where you're not the person who wants to get up and get recognized, but you're actually the person who wants to ask a question that you're curious to know the answer about. How often do we see that from elected officials, like in these hearings and these conferences, where the question that is asked is not about grandstanding, but it's about extracting actual information?
Well, it was interesting today because in New York City, and I think urban America across the world, literally, the issue of this storefront rent issue with the chains bubbling up, right? I mean, and so I did ask it of a woman from the federal government today, and I must admit it wasn't a good answer. You know, it was basically, I'll look into it. How can you not know that rent for small stores, bodegas and so on, that's a huge issue in the United States. If you read the front page of the Times, they're talking about the lack of downtown support, right? Because the malls are sucking the air out of downtown. So I was a little surprised with that answer. But then I know that I'm not going to go to her for support. I'm going to look, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And Assembly Member Linares brought up the same issue. So I guess we just have to keep plugging away at the questions, and then you get to see who your allies are and who the people are who may be very nice, but they have no clue about the problem.
In your fight against the chain stores, against having a bank on every single corner, have you gotten a lot of blowback from these large corporations, from their lobbyists, trying to intimidate you from backing down from that stance?
No, they don't do that. But there's a little silver lining, which is now that when we do the zoning changes, known as ULURP in our lingo, instead of, people are starting to say that we have to, as matter of the ULURP, divide up the stores, so they can't have one store. So we set that standard on the Upper West Side in a ULURP, and now it's pretty much across the board in Manhattan. So at least people are getting the picture. The second, of course, is no, the chain stores don't bother me, but it's not so easy to change the legislation in some way so that the banks don't come into other parts of Manhattan or the large drugstores. It's not worth. It's such a long story. Do you try to do some state allocated tax breaks for mom and pops? You tried to do zoning. There's no easy answer.
You have been in government long enough or around government or influencing the process as an activist to know that there has been a transformation. In the past 12 years, we had a mayor who imposed himself for the third term, but when you look back at what Michael Bloomberg did and represented, he did transform New York City from the Manhattan that we know. And is this good right now for what you try to do as an activist? Has it made it easier, more difficult? Is it the New York that you thought was going to be here going into 2015? And how are you dealing with that?
My feeling is this, I call it gentrification. There may be another word, but
let's not playing the games.
I've been a little surprised. It's worldwide. In other words, it sounds to me that whether it's London or Paris or Berlin, and of course, if you look at cities in San Francisco, is my understanding you can hardly find an apartment in San Francisco. The tech industry has driven up the rents. So the issue is, as a country, we have to figure out how to deal with that. Now, Bloomberg was part, except for 2008. Right before 2008, the prices were ridiculous for real estate, and now we're back to the ridiculous. So I think that it's not just him. In general, this country doesn't care that middle-income people and low-income people can't live in the communities from whence they came. And I find that that's what is the soul of our country. It's this diversity and not just the people of stores and schools. I get so tired of the school is segregated. Hello, the housing is segregated. Right? If you're going to go to your neighborhood school, how are you going to go if there's not a diversity of residents? I get tired of that argument. What are you going to do, bust everybody every time there's a new development? So we have this housing issue. The Mitchell-Lama program was the best program we ever had for housing.
Yeah,
but I don't know. We just have to keep plugging away. So it's Michael Bloomberg, perhaps abetting the situation, but he did some good things too. I'm not an anti-Bloomberg person. I think that he did some good things on transportation and environment. I don't think he understood, it's just not in his DNA to understand the housing situation, affordable housing.
I'm glad to hear you say that about gentrification, because I often feel like the definition of gentrification should be expanded to also talk about economic diversity,
absolutely,
right? Because it oftentimes is made into this kind of this racial fight or ethnic fight when it's about, it's like a plutocracy side of it where it's middle class and poor people are getting pushed out of their neighborhoods. It doesn't matter what their race or ethnicity is. I wanted to ask you about the borough presidency. The borough president, I'm a native Manhattanite, but I defected to Brooklyn. The borough president of Brooklyn was very incensed with the column that I wrote earlier this year when I said there should be a deputy mayor for Brooklyn because that person would be empowered by the mayor and have the teeth of the mayoralty to be able to influence public policy on a large scale within the borough. What have you done to what do you see as the platform of the borough presidency? What attracted you to this job, and what are you trying to do with it?
Well, I believe that the borough presidents now obviously have less power than we did in pre-1989. However, this issue, there's only one industry in New York: real estate, real estate, and real estate, in my opinion. And the borough presidents do have a role in this zoning change. So what I've been doing is working to do pre-ULURP discussions: South Street Seaport, Lenox Terrace, East Harlem, Penn Station area. I could go on. We've been meeting Hudson River Park. We've been meeting every single week with a facilitator, paid, to go through, okay, this project's gonna come to us in a year. We better have residents, stakeholders, businesses, community board sitting around this table for 3 hours every week to figure out what you want. Not a deputy mayor can't do that because the power of city planning commission and so on has got a contrary viewpoint. We really do take the citizens and the residents seriously. Now, when you're mayor, having worked for David Dinkins for 4 years, I'm very familiar with the pressures. You've got OMB, Office of Management and Budget, city planning stating, you got to do it this way. Now you have another voice in the Borough Presidents to talk about the landmarks and the, stakeholders in a way that's slightly different. With the support, we always involve the city agencies, because otherwise you're talking in a vacuum. So I do think that's the role for the Borough Presidents. At least that's what we're doing in Manhattan, where every square inch could be developed. If you don't have some kind, we call it pre-planning. I don't think it's ever been done before. So we have a very large land use team. We're training the community boards. We have sessions, we have 60 or 70 sessions, people at every session on zoning, land use, parliamentary procedure, and so on, so that they're gonna be the ambassadors much more so than they have in the past. I mean, to answer your question, what's left is this zoning, land use role in a city that's being developed.
How much land is there left in Manhattan? Where do you get it from?
You cannot imagine how many proposals are coming in. I don't know. They're tearing things down, building up, finding the square inch.
It's how much more can you milk this real estate for? Because it's incredible. They'll find ways naturally. But let me take you from the island of Manhattan to the island of Puerto Rico. You're in San Juan right now. You've participated in some of what I consider is good intentions of SOMOS conference and the fall conference and coming out of this. This is not the first one you attend. You've certainly been to Albany. You're familiar. You have enough Puerto Ricans on your island also to understand how we evolve and what the political relationship and the status thing is. But on the practical side, what do you see? You've already participated in some panels. There is well-intentioned legislators, some of them born here in Puerto Rico, to go back to Albany in a new session in 2015 with a Republican-controlled Senate. There's always, excuses in government and for not doing things. I say that in the context that the governor saw it fit for his benefit politically to develop the Women's Equality Party. I come up with an idea of having the Latinos Equality Party. Mm-hmm. Does the Democratic Party need to be pushed to that end to be able to, that we're part of the partnership, those of us that are Democrats, to push the agenda that we need to be recognized? Because there's nothing coming so far out of SOMOS in terms of an agenda.
I think you're right. I don't know if you need another party because you can't read the font on the ballot as it is.
That's a good practical point.
But I do think that, there's obviously the relationship between New York and Puerto Rico needs to be enhanced. Puerto Rico has 1 million employment issues. New York State, upstate, could be as bad in some cases as Puerto Rico in terms of lack of jobs. Every young person I know leaves Rochester and Syracuse, and I have friends here, and their kids go to the U.S. as soon
Correct.
as they get any kind of professional degree, they're out of here. So I think the issue is how do you, we send jobs overseas all the time. I don't know how you get jobs to come back. I don't buy the notion that labor's too expensive, land is too expensive. I don't think we really sit down and figure this out. We end up with casinos, which I think are a disaster.
So do I.
And I am not a fracking supporter. I fear for the land that it could impact and all the chefs that are buying local, maybe they wouldn't anymore. We wouldn't have any farms left. So I just wish that would help all of our state. I wish we could think very differently about economic development. And then, of course, the Latino community, Puerto Rican and others, there is so much possibility in the food industry and all the small businesses that they are part of. We got our economic development all backwards. I hope this conference has some sense of that. I think you can network to a point and then it's not worth it. On the other hand, if there's some connection between governors or mayors or controllers or whatever, hopefully it makes a difference. I don't know that there's one specific agenda. I do think, to me, it's about economic development. That's the job opportunity. That's the investment opportunity.
And I think you're along with some of the sentiment, and all the polls indicate that immigration seems to be on top of the charts of some people that actually, report on this. Immigration is not. It's important to Latinos everywhere, but it's seventh or eighth. And economic issues are up there with education and housing and health issues before you get to even things like the dream bill that we seem to want to hammer through. And it really is not the most important thing in the Latino community. You have that understanding because you're out there with the communities. You know our communities and what the needs are. What would you try to suggest to people that are actually in a position to do something about this in this next legislative session in Albany, and along with the governor? Is the governor not in tune with those kind of things that to be real for Puerto Ricans and Latinos in general, or is it the legislature that needs to be re-educated?
Well, the governor has to set the tone. His budget that comes out in January sets the tone. I haven't seen, to be honest with you, I've seen some Buffalo investment. But in terms of Bronx, which has the lowest, despite the great efforts of the Borough President, has still very low employment, and the poorest district is still in the Bronx in terms of the United States. And I don't think we do, city and state, a good job in terms of figuring out the capital needs that were addressed in this workshop. People are still complaining. I've been talking about MBEWB so long, I can't believe we're still talking about it. It's like, why are we still talking about reproductive choice? It's like endless. So there's still, people still have so many issues. It's still too complicated. So I just think that, I don't know if it's going to change, but I will say that from my perspective, I've been focusing on women and women of color, trying to get them jobs in terms of their startups. And I think the governor hasn't done a good job. I don't know whose fault it is, but I have not seen it as top of his agenda. I see Buffalo investment, right? I don't think, and I haven't...
Hoping to get the votes that he didn't get on Tuesday.
I was going to say. And also, working with we always want to work with SUNY and CUNY, because obviously they're very good places for students, and it has an impact later on, and anybody who goes to those colleges stays in New York State usually.
So, Mr. Governor, where's the Bronx billion, right?
Right. They actually devoted 90% of them voted for you.
Particularly from your colleagues in the Democratic Party, we've heard a lot of people talking about their objectives in the legislature that, quite frankly, are unrealistic, particularly given the Republican majority right now. But one thing that is a very realistic debate that is going to be the major point of contention, this next issue is going to be the cover story in the next issue of City and State, is all the rent regulations being up for renewal, and this big fight over housing. You said real estate is the lifeblood of New York. And although Speaker Silver has been an advocate for housing, he's also been the speaker when the rent regulations have been weakened twice during his leadership. And this is obviously a critical battle for New Yorkers. Going into this session, what are going to be your top priorities in trying to shape that debate and make sure that the people of New York are treated fairly in this process?
Well, the issue, of course, is in June 2015, you've got 421A, which gives an abatement to some owners up, and then you have the rent regulation. And I assume, just being very realistic, we all hope to have vacancy decontrol done away with, personal use, and a long list that improves people being able to stay in their rent-regulated apartments. I'm realistic. I think we're just going to be able to get a continuation of the current rent regulation. Let's hope to God we get that. Only over 1 million units are at stake. We've lost 100,000 units in the borough of Manhattan in the last 10 years.
And so it would be, given the current political environment, it wouldn't be a triumph, but it would be probably the best possible outcome, at least to maintain the status quo.
That's my opinion. Others who are closer to it may have other thoughts, but I believe that's which again, still, it's like attrition. You're still going to attrit a lot because you don't have these other protections.
You know, another thing about real estate, obviously we see at the end of Park Avenue now this massive tower, just like, I don't know where it even came from. It just blew my mind looking down Park Avenue. You always see that the line of the buildings, and all of a sudden there's this behemoth there. And now there are going to be 2 more towers that are of that scope. I mean, what's your feelings about building up like that? I mean, that is the tradition of our city, but is that the right direction to go?
I mean, first of all, the 2 towers on 57th Street specifically are blocking some sunlight that goes into Central Park. I think that's a real issue to me. I mean, you have a kid in the playground, and then from 12 to 12:20 is a dark playground. That's an unbelievable feeling, I think. And so we're trying to actually introduce legislation. Take some time that says you can't block sunlight on a park. It doesn't have to, I don't care if it's Central Park or Van Cortlandt Park. And then these developers are very smart. They buy air rights from every church that's about to go under. In fact, I can tell you some that I got a call about an hour ago. Somebody else is out looking at a church. So, we're in a horrible situation in terms of...
So wait a minute, today's Saturday, right? And you got a call about somebody, so that's how fast they're moving on this. There's no break for them.
They are definitely, the rumors are out about another church that another developer has bought air rights from, and what is Gale Brewer going to do about it?
Oh, Gale Brewer. So, and do you feel when they throw that at you, I mean, how much power do you really have to have an impact or affect the process?
I know what to do about this, Minister,
Okay.
But you have to try to do something. I don't sit around. I can't. It's not in my DNA. But I will, and this, I think I have enough lead time to try to, it hasn't happened yet. But in many cases, it has happened already. And the person who built on 57th Street bought air rights.
Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer, I don't know how someone of your candor got elected to your office, but apparently it happened. Thank you so much.
We actually need more of Gale Brewers if we can zero away to copy.
That's not very journalistic of you, Mr. Borrero.
No, well, what can I tell you?
Gail, thank you so much for joining us on City and State TV.
Thank you very much.